Onto this story now. The boardrooms of South African companies are becoming more women-friendly. New research shows that over the last 5 years, there's been a steady increase in the proportion of women on boards of the listed JSE companies. Now, the annual research is conducted by Business Engage, and it found that almost 1/3 of non-executive directors currently are female. But worryingly, it also found that there are still a number of boards that do not have female representation at all. So let's get more insights on that report with Jo Pohl, who's the Senior Advisory at Kearney Africa. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, Jo. And let's start with that positive finding in that over the last 5 years or so, there has been quite a healthy increase of women being represented in these big JSE-listed corporates.
Thank you so much, Rafia, and it's a great pleasure to be on tonight. I think there is definitely positive news. This particular research, which Business Engage has driven, and Kearney is incredibly proud and privileged to be a part of, alongside the DBSA as well as Nedbank, really tells us how much has shifted, plus where there's been some inaction. So you already mentioned it, just over 33% of non-executive directors are women. That's up from less than a quarter 5 years ago. We see from a lead independent director role, almost 3 times what we've had previously, so also well north of 20%. And then we see doubling of CEOs. So CEOs in the past 5 years, still single digits. That's where there's an opportunity and definitely something we need to look at. And we see CFOs also doubling to north of 20%. So as a consequence, there's been some progress. There's definitely an opportunity to do more. But to your point, 17 of the boards had no women representation. 41 didn't actually even report on it. And so although there has been progress, the question is it actually enough, given where we want to get to in terms of our commitment to gender diversity and gender balance? It makes good business sense, it's morally correct, and actually from a profitability, revenue, ESG and sustainability basis, we've seen the impact. The numbers actually speak for themselves when we have more diverse boards.
It really is important to have a diversity within these boards, Jo. And I'm just wondering, as you mentioned the stat around the fact that some boards have 0 women representation, that's quite worrying. And why do you think we still have that in 2022, where corporates will go on business as usual and not have the right amount of representation or no representation?
So it depends on the corporate and how they're structured, and there have been a couple of recommendations. In the UK, they've had 2 different commissions. They had the Lord Davies one and then the Hampton Alexander. Now they've got FTSE Women in Leadership 2022. We have our same leadership initiatives on research, this one by Business Engage. But some of the research said it would take 5 years to really make a meaningful difference. They're 10 years into their journey. We are 5 years into ours. So there is definitely still some room for improvement. And a couple of things maybe need to change. One, a deliberate intent. This needs to shift away from a tick the box exercise or from a one and done. So one woman on board is enough and we can move on. And when it doesn't refer to ongoing focus, but rather is execution and implemented, we start to see the difference. So I think it's not just the disclosure that matters around this, but it's actually what gets done in the business. We had a really interesting panel discussion when we launched the report to say, do consumers look at the makeup of their boards when they decide where to buy their goods? Do we look at the makeup of our boards and our leadership structures when we do business with certain organizations? Some companies have the JSE policy around gender, but not necessarily linked to their race or BE policy. So we haven't seen a direct correlation with how we report on business versus how we do business and what the intent was when it was set at the time versus actually executing on it. So I think what this report does is it sheds light on where there's been inaction, bearing in mind that it was 159 boards over the 5-year period in terms of a like-for-like comparison, with new entries, also some exits and some changes in the radical shift in board composition. But of those, which make up nearly 50%, we definitely have, this is a springboard to do more where you've done something and to do better where you have done nothing. Even the recent reports out of the UK have said our shift needs to focus to some extent. We need to look at the opportunity of actually publishing the gender pay gap potentially, looking at C-suite roles, being very deliberate about 1 in 4 roles at least having a woman, whether it's a chair on one of the boards, it's a lead independent non-executive, CEO, CFO. If you look at the current trajectory, 20% of our CEOs have come out of of a CFA, so they're financially qualified. Does that bode well for CFOs, where we've seen doubling in terms of the number of CFOs that are women? So I think the future holds a lot of opportunity and a lot of potential, but we need to be deliberate about our gender balance. We need to reaffirm our commitment, and commitment has to turn into action to really see a difference on the ground.
Yeah, being deliberate is going to be very important, Jo, and of course it comes hand in hand with accountability, in that we release these reports and we engage on the different issues, but we also have to hold these companies accountable and make sure that they are meeting the standards, so that we're not telling young women 15, 20 years down the line that there's just no opportunity for them in certain sectors of these corporates in the country.
Agreed. And I think the opportunity to demonstrate role models is important. So do we have existing role models where we can share those stories? You know, when people are doing it really well, I think sometimes we don't celebrate success enough as well. So we should be sharing those success stories. Is the size of our board, or do the sizes of our board allow that? Is there an opportunity for new board members to come on, learn, grow through the ranks, etc.? We talked about the availability of women, being, digging a lot deeper to find the right woman with the right expertise, and then the confidence women should have to step into those spaces. And often it's about wondering whether you can do everything or deliver at expectation. And if we go back and do our research of, young women on boards, because age is always a consideration, and women are nearly 4 to 7 years younger on the existing boards based on the research. Are we too young? Yes or no? What is experience? What counts as experience and relevant experience? How do we tap into our networks? How are we deliberate as women to sponsor other women onto a board? How do we recognize the men that have opened the doors? And when we are recruiting, rotating, or closing out vacancies, are we very deliberate about not recruiting someone that looks just like ourselves, but quite concerned, or rather considered, when it comes to the competence we are bringing on board, the capabilities we are bringing on board, the expertise, as well as the opportunity to fill the diversity gap, which is crucial to making better decisions, because you view problems from various angles. Do we have enough competent females? Yes. Do we have enough confident females? The reality is, I think we need to each be very loud and advocate and amplify for those that may not consider themselves ready, to say, actually, with the right support and the right engagement, you're ready to do this.
Very interesting insights. Thank you very much, Jo, for your time this evening. That is Jo Pohl, who's the Senior Advisory at Kearney Africa, joining us to speak about the gap of women representation that still exists, but also acknowledging a lot of the strides that have been made over the last 5 years.